It's always better to bring a gun to a knife fight. Here's your look at the Hasbro Indiana Jones Adventure Series Raiders of the Lost Ark, Cairo, Indiana Jones. This collectible 6-inch scale Adventure Series figure is detailed to look like the Indiana Jones Cairo character from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of Lost Ark. Featuring premium detail and multiple points of articulation, if Adventure has a name, it must be Indiana Jones. Just before we get down to the details on Dr. Jones, let's first grab the tape measure and see how tall the Cairo Indiana Jones figure stands. Now, this one actually wasn't part of the Ark build of figure wave. In fact, this figure was sold as a separate figure. Indiana Jones, though, stands 6 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 15 centimeters tall. Bearing a very similar likeness, in fact, sliding over the Indiana Jones from Raiders of the Lost Ark and bringing in the Indiana Jones from Temple of Doom, you can see there's a lot of very similar elements shared between the two figures. Molds, though, they would have had to tool things differently. Of course, the one from Cairo from Raiders of the Lost Ark has rolled up sleeves. The one from Temple of Doom, though, does have a ripped sleeve on one side and completely torn off sleeve on the other. The pants are also slightly tooled from one to the other, but there are very similar things, like the under torso, for example, seems to be identical. I'd almost be convinced that looking at the two head sculpts, they're exactly the same as well. Uncovering all the accessorized artifacts that came packed inside those tiny little bags. Of course, now with Hasbro moving the direction of recycled reusing of goods, it meant basically you had to make sure that everything was dumped outside the bag and you didn't throw anything away by accident. I'm taking a tally basically of all the things that come included with Indiana Jones. I don't think that anything was left behind in the bag. Definitely going to go back and check it. But basically you get yourself 2 pairs of interchangeable hands. You get the Capuchin monkey and you get 2 different versions of the whip as well as his pistol. Maybe not necessarily in that order, but first let's have a look at the tiny little monkey. The Capuchin monkey that we see in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think is very similar, in fact, to the one that came included with Marion as well. Fairly detailed as well for such a tiny little monkey. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that they managed to put in ball joints for the head of the monkey, articulation on the shoulders, only just a straight swivel, and they managed to still put an articulated tail there as well. Very, very nice, and very impressed with the amount of work that they put to just the monkey alone. And of course you can have that sitting on the top of Indy's shoulders if you wanted to, as he's carrying around this. Just be careful of the dates, that's all I say. The monkey, we'll put that to the side. Indiana Jones, I already mentioned, the figure comes included with a pair of interchangeable, actually 2 pairs of interchangeable hands. The first ones are fists. Indiana Jones are always good at using fists. So, of course, if you want to have the figure punching out people, or again, just drawing a gun and blowing away some sword wielder in this town square. Man, I really hope we get that figure at some point. But basically, just basic fists. The figure as well comes included with a hand specifically for holding the gun. You can tell right away by the fact this one has a little trigger firing finger on the end. And finally, the figure also includes this hand, which I think is specifically there for the monkey itself. You can kind of just take the monkey and balance it inside the hand. So if you want to have the Indiana Jones, of course, the figure carrying around the tiny little chimp, you can certainly do that also as well. Now, the figure also comes included with this tiny little pistol. It's molded fairly well in black plastic. Doesn't really have any paint on it, but I don't think he really had any coloring other than just black in the actual pistol he has in the movie. And of course, Indiana Jones draws that and proceeds to blow away that sword wielder. What you can do, though, I suppose, first of all, the existing hand that he has right now not only is just a thumbs up hand, but also a suitable hand for as well the whip. The whip itself, you just pry the fingers away from the palm. And the extended whip, if you wanted to have Indiana Jones displayed with that, it's simply just a case of popping that into his hand. Now, obviously, if you wanted to have him drawing a gun instead, well, obviously we're just going to first pull the hand from the peg, just wiggle it back and forth till finally the hand comes off. The hands I've noticed on Indy are a little harder to change. And just again, we're going to pop back in the new hand. The only unfortunate thing about this is, I guess Indiana Jones is always going to have the whip or the gun on one side of his body. I was going to say, like, if they had a way to maybe have, like, the gun drawing hand, say, on this side also as well, then you could have the whip. I think that's maybe a little too excessive. But you can go ahead then and take the pistol. Pistol fits then into his hand, and the figure lines up with the trigger. Perfect. If, though, you wanted to have the figure displayed like I had earlier with the whip, there is technically a holster section there on the side of his belt. It's the same, in fact, than the one we got with the Temple of Doom Indiana Jones. Sort of has the same difficult time as well. Take the pistol, just tuck it down as far down into the holster as you can. Then you take the flap and flap it over. Then you take this little part, and if everything works out, which it never does for me at least, this would just plug in place, and you'd be able to close up the harness. It just never stays in place for me. I've seen some people have easier times to do that. Sometimes you can actually get your finger underneath the flap and sort of stabilize it a bit as you plug this through. But with it being softer plastic, it's never an easy time to actually just close the flap and keep it closed. I actually had, in fact, an easier time of attaching the whip, because the figure also comes included with a rolled up version of the whip. And that just undetaches, just detaches a section right here. You put this right in place. And then this part, as still as soft of a plastic as it is, at least I had an easier time. Of course, I say that now. I had an easier time of plugging that in place. So at least there's a place to store the whip and the pistol if you didn't want to have the figure displayed with either. The last thing that Indiana Jones comes included with as an accessory is the thing he's currently wearing, this little satchel bag that he carries around with him. This side bag is molded nicely here in sort of a dark olive green plastic, bringing back in the Indiana Jones that we looked at earlier from Temple of Doom. You can see, in fact, it's the exact same belt, or the exact same pack. So the figure comes included with both. Detail-wise, though, I mean, first of all, let me just say, we've looked at several Indiana Jones figures here on the channel. We will be looking at more as we look at the build and artifact for The Last Crusade. Those videos will be coming up shortly. I will say it's definitely one of the better, if not the best, Indiana Jones. Up to this point, the sacrificial Indiana Jones, the one that's the hypnotic Indiana Jones inside Temple of Doom, that was probably my favorite head sculpt. But I will say, like, all in all, paint-wise, with one that actually has a fedora, this might be the best. Now, I did say earlier, though, bringing back in the original one from Temple of Doom, I think it is the exact same head sculpt. The fedora, though, is a little bit different from one to the other. I think it's just a case also that this one's a little bit more warped. But I think it is the same head sculpt. It's just a difference of paint. And if it's just a difference of paint, paint certainly has made quite a difference, because this, I think, is a much better looking head sculpt than we got here from Temple of Doom. The features aren't as sharp necessarily on Temples, and yet Raiders of the Lost Ark Indiana Jones, yeah, maybe you could say like the paint's a little messy when it comes to like the actual scruff that he has on his chin. But I think for me, at least, this is probably the best Indiana Jones that we've gotten so far. Now, of course, this one does have the rolled up sleeves. He doesn't have the ripped sleeves like, for example, this one did, whereas this one had the bare arm and one long sleeve on the side. This one has just the rolled up sleeves, but he has, like in the movie, the little tuft of shirt that sticks out the bottom over top of his belt. Speaking of belts, though, it is the same belt, at least I can see it seems to be the same belt, with the harness there on the side to hold the whip. And of course, the other holster on the other section to hold the whip, they hold the pistol. They seem to be identical. Well, some slight tooling had to be changed to have a rip there on the knee of this version of Indiana Jones. This one basically has just clean-looking pants. I like the detailing that they've added to the pants, where on the bottom of it, it's slightly a lighter coloring of that brown or that tan color. But it's a much cleaner-looking presented version of Indiana Jones. That if you like the look of the more khaki shirt, you maybe aren't as crazy at maybe the amount of paint that they added to this one. I think it's definitely the best Indiana Jones that we've gotten with this specific look. Just again, like we will be looking at a couple more Indiana Jones in upcoming reviews of the Temple, the Last Crusade artifact wave. So we will be looking at those figures. I'll probably be bringing back this Indiana Jones for those as well. Articulation, though, on Cairo Indiana Jones, it's basically the same as all the other Indies. So you're going to have a ball joint, first of all, with the head, allowing the head to rotate all the way around. The head can look down and up and back and forth as well. You may have already spotted, very observant viewers, that there's also a ball joint at the base of the neck. So that allows also as well the neck to move back and forth, up and down as well. Shoulders come out, they're on pin and hinge joints, so you can bring those arms out at 90 degrees. You can take those arms and rotate them, all the way around. There's a hinge in the elbow, but at least it allows as well the elbow to rotate back and forth, and the hands also rotate all the way around. Of course, missing one obvious point to make as well is the coloring that they've painted here for the tops of his sleeves. They tried to match the khaki pretty close with what would have been normally this colored plastic. It's pretty close, but there are a few little sections, and obviously you can see there on the elbow area, that isn't quite the same color as the rest of the khaki shirt. I wanted to make sure, of course, I mentioned that in this review as well. Now, for the articulation on the top of Indy's torso, because he has a rubber, essentially like a rubber shirt over top of it, while normally he would have a ball joint in the base of it, well, at the top of his torso, it's a little harder to gain access to that simply just because it has a shirt over top of it. He does have at least a base at the bottom of his abdomen, a secondary ball joint. So while you really can't get much going on at the top here, you can get a lot more going right around the waist area of the figure. Legs do split out. They're on ball joints. You can take the legs and move them forward, move them back. A little harder to do, and every once in a while I find myself detaching the whip if I bring the legs too far forward. But there's also a mild swivel at the top of the thigh, a single hinge on the knee that allows, of course, the lower leg to rotate back and forth. And then when it comes to the ankles, pretty much the same Z's still apply. Back and forth, up and down this way on the ankle, rocks back and forth this way also as well. And the figure does have peg holes on the undersides of the figure's feet. You know, for a second, actually, while I was trying to go back and pick up some of the figures I had missed out on when it comes to Indiana Jones, I was convinced I already had this figure in my collection. Going back, though, and looking at it and realizing what I had before was Temple of Doom Indiana Jones, you could probably see why I would have made that mistake. Because, again, like looking at them, especially if you're ordering these things online, I had to kind of keep doing a double take. Do I already have this figure? I didn't have this figure. I had something close to that figure with what, of course, we got with Temple of Doom. But as you can see, though, with Raiders of the Lost Ark Indiana Jones, not only does he have full sleeves intact on both sides, but honestly, I feel like he has a much better looking head sculpt. Whether it is the case that Hasbro has double dipped the same head sculpt, certainly is much better painted, I feel, on the Raiders of the Lost Ark release. Even though it's not really attached to necessarily a build and artifact wave, I feel it's definitely a crucial figure to be picking up if you want to be collecting the Indiana Jones figures from Hasbro. Well, just before we start our journey to the Last Crusade, I figured we would make one quick pit stop in Raiders of the Lost Ark, looking at Indiana Jones from Cairo. The notable thing about this one is obviously this is the Indiana Jones in the town square where he blows away that sword-wielding man. Yeah, as skilled as you may be with a sword, sir, you're not as skilled as a man with a pistol. Ironically enough, both played by Harrison Ford, went the cheap route of shooting first. I'm thinking also of Han Solo in Star Wars. Yes, Han shot first. This figure is strange in the sense that he wasn't actually part of the artifact wave. I really feel like this figure always should have been part of the artifact wave, but that's also something that Hasbro's done really silly when it comes to this line. Spoon wedging in there characters that really weren't part of that wave. As you'll obviously see when we look at the Last Crusade, they put in there characters from the Dial of Destiny. Dial of Destiny should have really been its own artifact wave and leave Last Crusade for all the characters that belong from that movie. With this figure being one that was sold separately, there could be a potential, like I had, of almost even passing on this figure, thinking that you already have him in your collection. You may be like me. You may have Temple of Doom Indiana Jones, but you may not have Raiders of the Lost Ark Indiana Jones, which I think is really the better of the two figures. If it is using, yes, the same head sculpt, it's definitely done a lot better, though, with this release than what we got with the Temple of Doom Indiana Jones. Let me know what you think of this figure down below in the comments section. And did you also make that mistake of almost passing on picking up this figure, thinking that you already had a khaki shirt Indiana Jones? If you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit it with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you would certainly like to stick around for more Indiana Jones reviews, I did already tip my hat. I did tip up my fedora to say that we are going to be starting our reviews of the Artifact Last Crusade wave, even though really it isn't technically Last Crusade. It's Last Crusade, and sprinkled in there, whether you like it or not, there's Dial of Destiny figures in there as well. Needless to say, we will be looking at that wave in an upcoming review. But if you haven't had enough of a fix for Indiana Jones and would like to certainly see more, popping up at the very end of this video as well would be a playlist of other Indiana Jones things that I've looked at. The earlier artifact wave, and we've looked at a couple of, we actually even looked at the little dial that he uses in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, of course, if you guys want to see that also as well, check out the playlist popping up at the very end of this video. Of course, as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.